You are listening to Human Capital Watch from the Conference Board.
Welcome to our first episode of the Human Capital Watch podcast series. We're very excited to be announcing this new initiative as we continue our conversations to examine trends, issues, and challenges of human capital professionals and the organizations in which we operate in. Thank you for joining me. My name is Amy Abel. I'm the Managing Director here at the Conference Board. Today, we are going to discuss what are the biggest issues keeping business executives up at night. To discuss that and more, I'm sitting with my colleague, Chuck Mitchell. Chuck is the Executive Director of Knowledge, Content, and Quality at the Conference Board. He's also one of the authors of our C-Suite Challenge, which just came out this week. As part of this survey, he and a few of my other colleagues gauged C-suite executives across the globe about not only the top challenges they'll face in the year ahead, but also about what they think the organization of the future will look like. If anyone has the pulse of the C-suite, it's Chuck Mitchell. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amy. Glad to be here.
Let's jump into the content and what did the research find? Can you share with us some highlights of what's keeping CEOs up at night in 2019?
Well, there's plenty of things keeping CEOs up at night in the coming year. I think when we look at it, there's two external and internal stressors if we look at it in two broad categories. And, externally, the stressors, what a difference a year makes because it's about recession this year. Far and away, the number one stressor that CEOs are feeling from the external environment is recession. But also the notion about trade and trade issues, instability in global trading systems is something that's really climbed up the ladder this year significantly, and along with political instability. So when you wrap those three kind of macro environmental aspects around it, you can see where this is what's keeping CEOs up at night. When they look at their organizations internally, probably one word can sum it up, and it's talent. It's about how to engage talent, how to retain talent, and how to find talent. And they see that too as probably one of the biggest obstacles to future growth is this lack of talent. So when you put those external and internal stressors together, it looks like a challenging year ahead.
It's really chaotic, the environment in which we're operating in now. The recession risk, I know, was something very low on the concerns of CEOs last year, and as you noted, rose to the very first concern as a hot button issue. It's just how we operate, how we function as employees in the company, and then how we as HR professionals try to facilitate our employees in the company is so dependent on these issues, and what the CEOs and executives are thinking. It's just very interesting given the turn of events and just reflection of how quickly our world changes.
Yeah, indeed. As I say, last year this was very low. Recession, the notion of recession was very low on everyone's list. This year it's number one for CEOs. It's number one for HR executives too. But what's interesting about this is that the macroeconomic data, at least at this point in time, really does not point to any imminent recession risk. So a lot of this is psychological. A lot of this is a confidence issue, and that in itself can cause issues down the road. Concerns about business investment, about slowing things down, about stopping and taking a look, and these internal stressors kind of feed off each other. But that notion of recession and recession risk can have an impact throughout an organization, even if the data behind it is really not pointing to it at this point in time. So that's something that a lot of organizations need to guard against. You can think yourself into a recession, or at least into a recession mode, and that's a concern for sure.
That's a great perspective, because I know I, as an HR professional, sometimes struggle to make sense of all of this conflicting economic data that I see in the news. So thank you for sharing that. It just helps me sort of keep grounded. And I think our listeners can view their news around them in perhaps a different perspective.
Right. I mean, and exactly so. And when we look at some of the internal stressors too, and there's we read a lot in the press about wage increases and wage inflation. Yet, in the minds of CEOs at this point in time, and in HR executives as well, that notion of wage increases is not really a big concern for them right now. Now, whether that's being a little head in the sand, it's difficult to say. But it's not having at least it's not totally on their radar yet. Even though we really do expect that wage rises will have an impact on profits down the road. So how that plays out is going to be interesting to see over the course of the year for sure.
Yeah, no, terrific. And I know the research report of the C-Suite Challenge also took on and asked CEOs, what did they think of the future organization? How will their organizations look like in 2025? And how will our lives change inside the organization? What were some views that you found?
Yeah, when we put all the answers together, we kind of got a picture of an archetype organization of the future or a successful organization out to 2025. And the first thing on their list really is, and this relates back to those immediate stressors on the organization of today, is that trying to achieve that long-term balance and with short-term performance. The CEO's view that the successful organization in 2025 will have cracked that nut, so to speak, that they will have that balance and not be overwhelmed by short-term performance. They'll be able to achieve their vision and the transformation that companies are going to need to be successful in the future. They see their organizations as being highly customer-centric. Probably the foundation in this is moving really from a product-centric culture to one of servitization. That's where that idea that the customer of today is a one-time transaction when they make a purchase. When you add the servitization side of those products, you have a long-term relationship with customers, and they see that as the future way forward for success. More importantly, perhaps, even that is this notion of how work gets done within the organization. They're looking to redefine work, and by redefining work, they're really looking at the development of agile, fluid teams within their organizations. And by the same token, having those flexible structures, the hierarchies fade and the bureaucracies fade, and having those really flexible structures to support that new nexus of work, the agile team. So those are really key aspects that they see as success going forward. They foresee much leaner functions driven by artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive learning. That the nature of work it's more highly cognitive than it is today. A lot of that routine issue, a lot of routine tasks go away. They also see technology really enhancing that functional and geographic collaboration. So as you go to teams as the nexus of your work, the technology is going to be able to enhance that collaboration. And decisions are going to be data-driven. They really see that data is going to help them devise and act in an agile way using agile methodologies and design thinking, incorporating all those kind of outside influences to improve their products and services, not only externally, but also for the internal workforce too. So those are some of the key issues. They're also one theme that we saw throughout the responses was this notion of greater inclusion throughout the organization, more transparency, better communication, more diversity. So those are some of the really key issues that the organization of the future, those traits that organizations of the future will have to be successful.
What struck me in the list that you just talked about and summarized is this is the CEO's view of what that successful organization looks like, but every item is an HR human capital challenge, right? How we define agility, how we work in more teams, leaner functions, artificial intelligence, all of this impacts what we do on a day-to-day basis as a human capital professional. And so it really reflects upon us to think about how our jobs will change so that we can better support the organization to meet these needs. It's not possible for the organization to change without our help and our support. And so what does that mean for us? I think that's the pondering that we can share with our listeners?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the HR function will need to change and will need to be aligned with changes, the business strategies that are going to drive success in 2025. And I think when you go back to that notion of CEOs seeing their organizations as being highly customer-centric, you need the HR organization to be customer-centric. And by that, we really mean how employees are engaged. Most organizations today are pretty good at engaging their customers in a digital world, but that experience that the customers have does not really translate into the same experience that employees have internally. And that is, I think, one of the key aspects for the HR function is that customer centricity and defining who their customers are, from the full-time workforce to the contingent workforce. They really need to drive those experiences. I think that's going to be a big part of it. And obviously the technology side. This notion of agile methodologies that CEOs are so keen on, again, for that external customer-facing experience, needs to be bought inside for the employee experience too. They need to be paralleled. You need to provide your employees are customers and consumers in the outside world, outside of the office, and they're expecting that same sort of experience internally.
And I think it's that expectation that perhaps HR as a function, collectively, we really have not, I don't want to say we haven't embraced, but we haven't figured out, well, what do we need to change as a result? And it's a huge change. It's a huge challenge. We like to say, your employees are your customers on the outside. So if you bring them inside the organization, imagine everything that we offer in HR, everything from benefits to learning. How do you Netflix, Uber, and Amazon, everything that you offer from an HR perspective, because that's some of the expectations that your employees will have, right? That's a huge challenge and a huge change for all of us. I think even mentally, much less in execution.
It really is, and I think it's actually more complex than meets the eye, if you will. When a customer or a consumer is on the outside world and they're looking for that best digital experience that they can find, that actually, if you're an organization, that's the bar, the standard that you need to meet. It may not be, if you're selling shoes, you may not you need to match your next competitor who's selling shoes. That used to be the case. Now it's you need to meet that competitor who's providing the best online enhanced customer experience there is, regardless of the product or service they're selling. And that expectation is what's brought back into the organization from the employees themselves. It's not that, we can be as good as the next company that makes widgets, but we need to be as good as the best company employee experience that is providing a really good digital employee experience. So the bar becomes really high for that. And that's something I think a lot of organizations may underestimate.
Yeah. And so, of course, it makes me think, given that huge challenge, how will HR change and evolve to meet these new demands? What does some of our research say, and what have some of the organizations that you've been talking to say? Yeah,
well, back earlier, actually late last year in 2018, we had a meeting of 250 senior HR executives in Chicago, strategic HR joint council meeting. And the wisdom of the crowd that emerged from that meeting was kind of interesting, that the first notion that came up was this notion about customer centricity, that the HR function of the future really needs to be customer centric. You need to define who your customers are, your employees, your contingent workers, and provide them with that external customer consumer type experience. And part of the way to do that is this notion of design thinking. Design thinking is where you create less than perfect, you fail, you gather the input from all the constituents, all the stakeholders, redesign and go back out. And that notion of design thinking is something that our HR members feel is coming to the organization sooner rather than later. The same for Agile, that same notion of being able to create the less than perfect, refine, and then get it out there again, pilot on small programs. That Agile methodology is really going to be an important part of the future of the HR function. This notion of, with CEOs defining and HR executives defining agile teams as the new nexus of the workforce, one of the things that we have heard from our members too is that it's tough to place a value on that work within teams and then to reward it and compensate it. And that's one of the issues I think that the HR function really needs to look at. And from our feedback from our members, we're hearing that no one's really quite tapped that one really well yet. It's still in the formative stages. They're still struggling. The existing performance management systems are a head-to-head competition, and it's an antithesis to the notion of collaboration. So all of that's a really important part that needs to change.
No, and of course, I think we all understand and would even embrace that teams are the way to go. And there are very few people whose roles in organizations today do not involve teams. But to your point, the infrastructure behind it is still what we've done for decades. And I know you and I have both talked to many organizations that have struggled with even evolving their performance management systems. Do we rate? Do we not rate? And lots of other challenges around that. And so, to your point again, we don't see a lot of organizations really having figured it all out. The good news, though, is we see a lot of organizations experimenting and HR experimenting, which is a concept that I've continued to talk to members about. HR historically has not been known to be an experimenter, and now we need to do that, just like customer market researchers do, or they go out and figure out if customers like the product in red or orange. We need to do the same thing in HR. Do your employees want it A or B, and what does that mean? And if they prefer A and that succeeds, great. If it fails, move on and do something else. And that concept of experimentation, I think, is hard for many of us in HR to fully embrace, and not just embrace, but to execute. You may have an organization that is not so favorable to that kind of approach, but this is where we see a lot of organizations going on the business side, and certainly that should reflect on the HR side as well.
Right. I mean, that cultural change is a heavy lift, and I think one of the key takeaways from our Chicago meeting was this notion of HR needing to disrupt itself before it's disrupted. It needs to get ahead of the curve. A lot of the decisions, a lot of the challenges, a lot of the programs are based on old paradigms, old business models that are evolving at the speed of light, if you will, in a digital age, and that HR really needs to be willing to disrupt itself. It's a culture. You can't get complacent. You can't get comfortable. And along with that too, I mean, with the impact of technology on the function. There's the difference between digitization, if you will, where you're applying technology ad hoc to individual processes, and the whole notion of digital transformation, which is an enterprise or a function-wide strategy that creates a business case, a business reason, and an end-to-end for the application of technology. And the notion that HR needs a comprehensive digital strategy itself, one aligned with the business, but it needs its own digital strategy for end-to-end process is something that our HR executives have seen as being critical to future success. You can't just do it on an ad hoc basis, throw technology at a process. Also then that comes into that notion of really having some empathy for those affected by digital technologies. The reminder, you need to remind people that it's not about the elimination of jobs, but it's really about the evolution of jobs.
And that's a great phrase for us to end with. The world continues to change, and obviously our organizations need to change as well. So that evolution of jobs for all of us, and the evolution of our own job, maybe we can walk away from this podcast thinking about that, and how will we evolve in our own jobs so that we could do what we want to do and better support the employees in our organization. Lots of great challenges. Thank you so much, Chuck, for your insights on the new C-Suite Challenge 2019, which of course all our members of the conference board are able to download the new report. I'm Amy Abel here with Chuck Mitchell. Thank you for listening to a podcast of the Human Capital Watch series.
This has been Human Capital Watch. from the Conference Board.